Welcome to Create More Intimacy, a podcast for men. I'm Elisa Stoddard, and I help successful men stop chasing sex and start building real connection so they finally feel close, connected, and wanted again. You have been doing a lot. You know this. You can feel the weight of it. The hours you put in at work, the bills that get paid, the problems that get solved before anyone else even knows they were problems. You show up. You provide and you handle what needs to be handled without making it dramatic or asking for a medal. And somehow, none of it's landing. You come home and the house is quiet in a way that doesn't feel peaceful. You try to do something nice, dinner, a gift, weekend getaway, and she seems appreciative enough in the moment, but nothing shifts. The distance is still there the next morning. You reach for her and she's either not interested or she goes through the motions and you can't tell which is worse. So you do what you've always done when something isn't working. You think about what else you could add. What could you do more of? What you might be missing. And underneath that, quiet and uncomfortable, is a question you don't say out loud. How much more is it going to take? That question matters, not because the answer is simply more, but because the question itself is the problem. You are trying to solve something that isn't a volume problem. You are trying to purchase something that isn't for sale. Welcome to episode 54. She doesn't want more from you. She wants something different. Most men don't walk into marriage thinking of it as a transaction. That's not how it feels at the beginning. At the beginning, there is desire and attention and a genuine pull towards each other. But somewhere along the way, quietly and without a formal announcement, many men start operating inside a transactional frame. You provide stability, you handle responsibility, you keep everything running, and in exchange, you expect to feel wanted, appreciated, close. This isn't cynical, it's actually what you were taught. You watched the men around you growing up, and you learned that a man's value in the relationship is demonstrated through what he produces, what he earns, what he builds and protects and maintains. Love was something you showed through effort, and effort, if it was consistent enough, was supposed to be returned. So you built your adult life around that blueprint. And it worked for a while, or it seemed to. There was closeness in the early years. There was sex and laughter and the feeling that you were building something together. The effort felt like love because it was received as love. What you didn't see was that the early closeness wasn't coming from the effort. It was coming from presence, from your attention, from the fact that you were emotionally available in ways you probably don't even remember now, because no one told you that that's what was actually creating the connection. Over time, the presence faded and the effort stayed, and you kept waiting for the equation to balance. One man who came to me put it plainly. He said, "I do everything for her so she can be happy, and I get no connection back." He wasn't quietly complaining. He was genuinely confused. He had held up his end of the deal, and he could not understand why the deal wasn't paying out. That confusion is real, and it deserves to be taken seriously, because he wasn't wrong that he had been doing a lot. He was wrong about what the doing was supposed to create. Before going any further, it's worth pausing on why this frame is so persistent. Because if you're listening to this and feeling some resistance, if part of you wants to say, "But I really have done a lot, and that should count for something," that response makes complete sense. You aren't irrational for feeling that way. The transactional model works almost everywhere else in your life. At work, effort produces results. More input generally means more output, and you are rewarded for what you deliver. Recognized for your performance and measured against clear metrics. There is a logic to that feels very stable and fair. You carried that logic home because it was the only logic you had. And here's the part that makes it even trickier. In the beginning of the relationship, the transaction appears to work. You put in the effort and you receive closeness. You plan a good date and she seems genuinely happy to be with you. You handle something difficult and she looks at you like you're exactly who she needs. The feedback loop is real. It just isn't teaching you what you think it's teaching you. What's actually happening in those early moments is that you are present. You are paying attention. You are curious about her. You are bringing yourself, not just your output, into the relationship. The effort is just the vehicle. The presence is the thing. But you logged it as effort equals closeness, so you kept adding effort. And slowly, over the years, the presence that was always the real currency quietly disappeared from the transaction, and you didn't notice because you were still showing up in every logical sense. Another man described it to me this way: I've been trying to stay calmer and communicate more, work harder on tasks around the house, be more caring, and ask if she needs me to do anything. He was working the checklist. He genuinely believed that the right combination of inputs would eventually unlock the closeness he was missing. He had no framework for the idea that the checklist itself was the wrong approach. That is not a character flaw. This is what happens when emotionally intelligent, capable men are never given a different model. Here's where the disconnect becomes painful because the story looks very different from her side. She sees a man who is responsible, reliable, someone who handles things, and she is grateful for that, genuinely. But gratitude and desire are not the same thing. Feeling provided for and feeling connected are not the same thing. Appreciating what someone does and feeling close to who they are, those two are two separate experiences. What she has often been feeling, quietly and probably for a lot longer than you are aware, is alone. Not because you're absent in the physical sense, but because the part of you that she can actually connect with, the part that has feelings, that gets uncertain sometimes, that might admit something is hard, that would stay in a conversation instead of solving it or shutting it down, that part has been largely unavailable. When she tries to bring something up and you go quiet, she does not think, oh, he's just processing. She thinks, I am on my own with this. When she tries to talk about how she's feeling and you immediately move into problem solving or fix it mode, she doesn't think, he just cares and wants to fix it for me. She thinks, he doesn't want to actually be here with me in this. When she stops reaching, stops asking, stops initiating, and this is the part that tends to land so hard, she isn't pushing you away. She's protecting herself. She has tried in the ways she has known how to get through to you. And when it didn't work, she stopped begging. Now, I know that's a loaded word, but that's a specific word, and I chose it on purpose because it comes directly from many of you. One man said to me, a man shouldn't have to beg for sex. What he didn't see yet was that she had stopped begging too. Long before he noticed the distance, she'd already grieved it even. So when you bring home flowers or plan a trip or do everything she puts on the list and nothing changes, it isn't because she's ungrateful or impossible to please. It's because what you brought home was a gesture, and what she needed is you. Not your output, not your effort, you. This pattern has a few recognizable shapes, and it's worth naming them directly because most men don't see them as part of the same issue. The first is escalating effort. When closeness feels thin, many men do more. More tasks, more gift giving, more planning. If dinner didn't shift things, well, then maybe a weekend away will. If the weekend away didn't work, well, maybe a bigger gesture could. There's a quiet desperation underneath this that rarely gets named because it doesn't look like desperation from the outside. It looks like trying, but it is still the same transaction, just with a higher price tag and higher stakes. And every time it doesn't work, the confusion and resentment deepen. The second shape is compliance. Many men start listening for instructions. They do what she asks, handle what she points to, and checks the boxes that she sets out. They believe that they are being responsive, but what they're actually doing is waiting to be managed and then feeling resentful when doing what they were told doesn't produce the warmth they expect. I had someone say, I do everything for my wife to make her happy, and I get no connection. He wasn't describing neglect. He was describing compliance. And compliance doesn't create closeness. It creates a dynamic where she feels like the manager and he feels like nothing he does is ever enough for the boss. The third shape is withdrawal, and it's disguised as giving up on the transaction. This is the man who has tried the effort approach, watched it fail, and then quietly stopped. He tells himself he's just being realistic. He's not going to keep chasing something that doesn't come back to him. He retreats into work or a hobby or just a kind of flat emotional absence that he calls peace. But underneath it, the resentment is still there. The keeping score is still there, and he hasn't stopped transacting. He just withheld his side of the deal because hers hadn't been delivered. What all three of these have in common is that they are still operating inside that frame. More or different or nothing, it doesn't matter. As long as the relationship is being run like a deal, the result will be the same because what she is waiting for has nothing to do with the deal. Here's the thing that most men find genuinely difficult to hear. It's not because it's harsh necessarily, but it points to something that they were never taught and they weren't expecting to need. She wants to feel like you are actually there. Now, I am not saying there in the sense of like physically present or financially contributing or logistically reliable. There in the sense of emotional availability, willing to be known, capable of sitting in something uncertain or uncomfortable without immediately fixing it or fleeing it or minimizing it. She wants to feel like if she told you something true about how she's feeling, you would stay. You wouldn't shut down. You wouldn't get defensive. You wouldn't turn it into a problem to solve or a reason to pull back. You would just stay. That sounds simple. For most men, it is one of the hardest things they have ever been asked to do, and here's why. You were taught in ways both directly and invisibly that emotions are a problem, that your feelings were best managed privately, minimized, or not mentioned at all. That the measure of a strong man was whether he could hold things together without burdening anyone else. I had a client say, I was never taught how to be emotionally aware growing up. In fact, I was taught to pretend that negative situations and emotions weren't really there. That is not a personal failure. That's an inheritance. You received a model of manhood that had no room for emotional presence, and then you entered an intimate relationship where emotional presence is the primary currency. And the mismatch was built in before you even got started. So when she asks for something different, it doesn't feel like a reasonable request. It feels like she's asking you to do something you don't even know how to do in a language you were never taught to speak or understand, which is exactly what it is. The men who move through this don't do it by suddenly becoming different people. They do it by getting honest about what has been running underneath the transaction. The fear that if they stop producing, she wouldn't want them. The effort isn't just effort, it's protection. As long as he keeps providing and keeps delivering and keeps being useful, there's a case to be made for his value in the relationship. And the moment it stops, there's nothing left to hide behind. Another client said, I've done everything to build a home, provide a good life, protect my family, and I get no appreciation. What he was really saying underneath that was, I have given everything I know how to give, and I'm terrified that it's not enough. Not the effort and not me. That fear that who you are, separate from what you do, might not be enough, is what the transaction is protecting you from. And it's also what's keeping you from the thing you actually want. The shift that actually moves things is not adding a new behavior to the checklist. It's a change in the underlying orientation. When a man stops asking, what else can I do to get closeness back? And starts asking, am I actually here in this relationship with this person? Something different becomes possible. It doesn't look dramatic. It looks like staying in a conversation instead of solving it. It looks like saying something true about how you're feeling instead of deflecting it with a joke. It looks like noticing when she seems far away and asking about it with genuine curiosity, not an agenda, and not the urge to fix it. It looks like letting a moment be awkward without rushing to smooth it over. These are small things, but they don't feel small in the doing. Because what they require is for you to tolerate uncertainty. Being in the room without knowing how it will land. Showing up without a guaranteed return on investment. That is the actual ask, not more, not different tasks, not better communication techniques. Presence. Without a transaction attached to it. What men consistently tell me, once this starts to shift, is that the relationship feels different before anything explicit has ever been said. Somehow the tone changes and she relaxes in ways she probably doesn't even realize. The conversations feel a lot less loaded. There is a small amount of ease that wasn't there before. And it's not necessarily because the problems actually got solved. It's because she is starting to feel like he is actually there with her. And that is when change is possible. Now, one more thing, and this matters. You will not do this perfectly. You will revert to the transaction model when you're tired or scared or rejected. You will catch yourself keeping score or escalating effort or retreating into work. Don't see that as failure. It's not. That is a pattern that has been in place for a long time, and patterns don't just dissolve overnight. What is different, once you see this clearly, is that you know what you are doing when you do it. You can name it, and naming it gives you a choice that you didn't have before. A man should not have to beg, and neither should she. The relationship you actually want, where closeness is real, where you feel wanted for who you are and not just what you provide, where she reaches for you and means it, that relationship does not come from doing more. It comes from being fully present in what you're already doing. That is the thing worth working toward. If you are listening to this and something in here has named what you've been living, if you recognize yourself in the transaction, in the confusion, in the quiet resentment of doing everything right and still coming up short, well, that recognition matters. A call with me isn't about giving you a better checklist. It's about getting clear on what's actually happening in your relationship and what it would take for something real to change. Not more effort, but a different way of being in it. If that sounds like what you need, you can book a call at elisastoddard.com. Take care. We'll see you next time. Thanks for being here. If something in this episode hit home, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. It helps more men find the support they need. And if you are ready to get help or take the next step, you'll find the link to book a free call in the show notes. I'll see you next time.